Right now we're in a meta where bows are able to dominate PvE, and at the top of everyone's list is the exotic bow Wishender. Today we're going to talk about what makes it so strong, so sit down and tune in. My name is Art, and welcome to Destiny Guides. Bows are in an interesting spot with the current sandbox. As of right now, most legendary bows feel pretty decent. There are some perks you can get to make them have a faster draw time and target acquisition, and they get perks in the third or fourth columns similar to other weapons. But bows are mostly used in endgame PvE to make use of the current season's artifact mods. They're not great for ad clear given how most can only kill one enemy at a time, so most players will usually opt for a special weapon or better equipped primary instead. Even if you do decide to use it in something like a Grandmaster Nightfall, you might as well use an exotic bow at that point. But when it does come to selecting an exotic, there are a decent handful to choose from that are relatively good for high-end content. You have Monarch, a void bow with the ability to poison enemies with intrinsic anti-overload on poison hits, a great choice for anything with overload champions. Another option is the new strand exotic bow Wishkeeper. Since this bow is new at the time of writing this script, it's still finding its place in the meta. So the more people mess with it and make builds around it, the more we'll find out where it stands. What we do know about it is that it has a similar format to the Hierarchy of Needs exotic bow, in that once you get enough kills and or precision hits, you get to activate its perk. Once charged, you can hip fire to launch an ensnaring trap that suspends targets that get caught in it. On paper, it's a really cool idea that makes things interesting and can play a big part in people's builds, especially since it's intrinsically anti-unstop. Using these bows as examples, we can get a small glimpse of how the meta would be if there was no bow that was guaranteed to be at the top. Most would flock to using bows just like this that are exotic with perks that help with ag control and have intrinsic properties to stun champions. But that number one spot is where Wishender comes in. As you can guess from the title of this video, Wishender is more than just your average bow. Originally released during the Forsaken campaign, it only had a few perks to its name. The Season of the Plunder introduced a couple of new additions to it. Currently, the bow has the ability to see through walls when fully drawn thanks to the perk Queen's Wrath, and is intrinsically anti-barrier. Its damage was also buffed against champions, bosses, and mini-bosses by 10%. Now on paper, this bow doesn't seem all that special when compared to the other bows we've mentioned. It seems like its perks would be underwhelming and shouldn't be able to keep up with the rest. But Wishender is able to compete for several good reasons. Even without the option of applying a debuff to enemies or the ability to kill many adds at a time, it still hits like a truck. It also received the buff to hits against enemies being increased from 2 to 3. This change is huge for players being able to get their supers back faster as a result. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean that other weapons are simply invalidated because of Wishender? In some ways, yes. Firstly, having intrinsic anti-barrier is always a plus. In addition to this, other bows have properties that are nice to have that help you ensnare, poison, burn, or even electrify enemies. But by the time that you build up the kills you need or set up the conditions required to utilize your other bow's perks, Wishender has the ability to just kill the enemies off quickly and give you additional super energy in return. This of course doesn't mean that the other bows are necessarily invalidated, because there are some that handle ad clear better than Wishender, especially with the right build. However, when compared to its damage output and anti-barrier capabilities, it's tough to compete. Even when the seasonal artifact has anti-barrier bow, it usually takes at least 2 charged bow shots before you can fully break its shield, or at least that's how it's been in recent seasons. I'm sure some of you remember that before Wishender came along, Arbalest was the number one tool for taking down barrier champions because it was able to one-tap their shields instantly. But now we have a primary weapon that doesn't require special ammo, does the same job, and brings all of these other perks to the table. The fact that it's so versatile in endgame content is huge. Now, the player base has been using Wishender for multiple seasons, and throughout the meta and seasonal artifacts, it's been nice to have it as a consistent option in content like Grandmaster Nightfalls. But after all this time, it'd be nice to finally get to utilize other bows. As great as it is, I like to be able to use Monarch and have it feel just as good. Now that we've discussed all of these different features that make Wishender so great, do I think it's too good? Short answer, yes. I think that it's good we have a bow that is consistently great in harder content, especially when we get artifact mods that are lackluster. But it also makes the weapon feel like a chore to use when it's usually so much better than most of the other options we have. But I don't think it deserves a nerf. Sure, it's great by comparison, but I think that instead of nerfing it, which would cause most players to give up on using the bow entirely, I think that it would be better to buff the other bows instead. So what are some things that we can change to have other bows compete with Wishender? If we're talking about a general buff to bows, the most obvious change would be to just increase their damage output across the board. That way Wishender can still be utilized and the other weapons won't drag behind. Another way we could solve this would be to tackle exotic bows individually and tune them that way. As an example, for the bows that require setup like Hierarchy or Wishkeeper, you could simply reduce the required amount of kills so that their perks can be activated sooner. Please keep in mind I'm aware that something like this could negatively affect PvP. Even if it's not likely, I'd like for Bungie to be able to tune weapons separately. They did this when they adjusted Wishender to have 3 hits to combatants but still 2 hits to players, so it is possible. Regardless, I'm sure there's a plethora of other adjustments you could make, so feel free to let me know what you think would be good in the comments below. But overall, something needs to happen. Again, I want to stress that nerfing Wishender isn't the right call here. Buffing other bows and or weapons would be a better move so that we don't have another Arbalest situation, where hardly anyone is choosing it over Wishender. But that's about all I have for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, guys.